Imagine trying to find absolute spiritual enlightenment not by meditating in a perfectly pristine, silent mountain cave.
Right, which is the image everyone always goes to.
Exactly. But instead of that, you're sitting in the middle of a graveyard at midnight,
Yeah.
just surrounded by ash, by decay, by everything that polite society tells you is taboo or terrifying or, just impure.
Oh, yeah. It's intense.
And instead of trying to escape that messiness, you are tasked with finding the absolute center of the divine right there, like right in the darkest part of the human experience.
It completely shatters the ascetic ideal we are so used to. I mean, we have this deep-seated cultural assumption that to find the truth, you have to starve the senses, you know?
Right. Get rid of all the noise.
Exactly. If you subtract the body, subtract your desires, subtract all the chaos of the world until you're just left with this sterile, untouched silence.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today we are opening up a profoundly challenging and intensely personal document provided directly by you, the listener. It's a set of notes simply titled Tantra.pdf.
And it is fascinating.
It really is. Our mission today is to completely dismantle the modern, westernized pop culture version of Tantra. We are stripping away the idea that this is just some exotic manual for sexuality or an excuse for undisciplined rule-breaking rebellion.
Yeah, we really need to clear that up right away.
Because what we have here is an incredibly rigorous, ancient, and highly psychological technology of the mind.
And we are exploring this through a very specific custom-tailored lens that you provided in your notes. You shared that you use an internal framework of subpersonalities to understand your own mind.
Which I absolutely love, by the way.
It's a great framework. And specifically, you introduced us to a persona named Tara. So Tara is a subpersonality characterized by calm wisdom, a fearless openness to taboo topics, and the energy of a mystic trying to decode the secret patterns of the universe.
I found myself really fascinated by Tira while reading this. If we think of the mind as a theater, Tira is the character on stage who isn't afraid of the dark corners of the script.
That's a great way to put it.
So this entire conversation is designed to explore how the actual historical mechanics of Tantra intersect perfectly with the psychological reality of someone like Tira. But to understand how Tantra changes a person's view of their own mind, we have to start with its most radical core premise.
Right, the foundation.
The premise that flips traditional spirituality entirely upside down.
Right.
It's the idea of saying a radical, uncompromising yes to existence.
The contrast here is the concept of renunciation. Throughout history, major spiritual traditions, whether we are talking about early Christianity, certain schools of Buddhism, or Orthodox Hinduism, they've often framed the physical world as a waiting room, or an illusion, or even a trap.
Like it's something you have to escape.
Exactly. The material world is heavy, it's sinful, it's a distraction. Tantra looks at that exact same world and asks, well, what if the trap is actually the doorway?
I love that. Because if the divine is truly infinite, it can't just be hanging out in the quiet moments. It has to be in the noise, too. And your notes explain this by introducing two fundamental principles, Shiva and Shakti.
Yes, the core binary.
And I want to be careful here because a Western brain immediately pictures two distinct gods sitting on clouds, throwing lightning bolts or something. But the notes describe them more like the fundamental physics of consciousness.
That's spot on. They are inseparable poles of reality. So Shiva represents pure awareness. It is the stillness, the silent witness, like the blank canvas of consciousness.
Okay, the canvas.
Right. And Shakti is the dynamic energy. It is the movement, the creative force, the physical matter, the emotional surges. Basically, everything that has form, vibration, or movement is Shakti. And the critical insight here is that they are never apart. You cannot have the dancer without the dance.
So to map this onto our own direct experience and really onto Tira's framework, every single thought that pops into our heads, every spike of adrenaline, the literal physical feeling of the chair we're sitting in, or a sudden wave of grief,
All of it.
all of that is Shakti playing out on the canvas of Shiva. And if absolutely everything is made of this unified interplay, the logical conclusion is staggering. It means nothing in existence can be inherently impure.
That is the terrifying freedom of the tantric view. If everything is the divine interplay, then your anger is divine, your sexual desire is divine. Even your boredom while sitting in traffic is divine.
I was trying to come up with a way to visualize this shift in perspective. Like, if traditional subtractive spirituality is like pulling over and turning off a car's engine because the noise and the shaking are just too distracting for you to think clearly.
Okay, yeah.
Tantra feels like keeping the engine running rolling down the windows, listening to the aggressive roar of the pistons, and learning to drive the machine like a professional stunt driver. You aren't avoiding the machine, you are using its maximum horsepower.
That analogy gets you exactly to the threshold.
Mhm.
And this is but the danger of the stunt driver idea is that it can imply reckless indulgence.
Ah, like just joyriding.
Exactly. You aren't just revving the engine to make a lot of noise and show off. The fundamental goal is transmutation.
Meaning taking the raw material and fundamentally altering its state.
Yes. Think about the metaphor of fire used in your source material. Fire is raw, wild energy. If you just throw yourself into it or let it run rampant, which is what the undisciplined rebel does, you will burn your house down.
Right. You just destroy everything.
You will destroy your life with unchecked desires or raging emotions. But if you capture that fire, study its nature, and put it in a lantern, it becomes illumination. Tantra doesn't say, hey, go indulge every dark desire you have. It says, take the intense energy bound up in that desire, extract it from the object you are obsessing over, and use that raw heat to wake yourself up.
Wow. And the mechanism for doing that, the actual process of turning the wildfire into a lantern is what the notes call sadhana.
Yeah.
Discipline practice.
It's non-negotiable.
This isn't just a philosophy you agree with while sipping coffee. It is a rigorous training of perception.
It is exhausting, meticulous work because maintaining a state of highest awareness while actively engaging with the heat of the world requires vastly more focus than maintaining awareness in a quiet room with your eyes closed. You are treating the body as a laboratory.
But you can't just walk into a 10th century Orthodox society, declare everything is pure, let's use the messy stuff, and expect people to politely nod along.
No, absolutely not. They hated it.
This philosophy was incredibly dangerous to the status quo. To understand why, we have to look at the historical undercurrents. Like, who were the people actually brave enough to practice this, and where did they hide?
Well, Tantra is notoriously difficult for historians to pin down because there is no single founder. There's no Buddha sitting under a tree, no Jesus on a mountaintop. It operated much more like an underground mycelial network, slowly spreading across India roughly between 500 and 1200 CE.
The notes describe it as a synthesis. It pulled from early Vedic rituals, the dense philosophy of the Upanishads, the internal focus of yoga, but crucially, it absorbed local, non-Orthodox folk traditions.
Yes, the grassroots stuff.
Traditions that celebrated goddesses, nature, and blood.
It was a pragmatic response to an elitist spiritual bottleneck, because the Orthodox Brahminical systems of the time had very strict rules about who was allowed to achieve liberation. It was heavily skewed toward male, high-caste renunciates who could afford to literally leave society and study scripture.
Leaving everyone else behind.
Exactly. Tantra essentially asked a populist question. What about the person with a family? What about the person working in the fields? What about the outcast? If liberation requires leaving the world, the system is fundamentally broken.
Right. But I was reading through Tira's notes, and I kept hitting a logical wall here.
Okay, what is it?
If Tantra believes that everything is the divine interplay of Shiva and Shakti, then the Orthodox temples, the strict rules, and the high-caste priests are also Shakti. They're also divine.
That's true.
So why did Tantra deliberately clash with them? Why not just smile, agree that the pristine temple is divine, and go about your day?
That is a great pushback. The answer is because human neurobiology is stubborn, and the brain is a relentless categorization machine.
Okay, meaning what?
Well, the Orthodox traditions had spent centuries conditioning people's brains to place the divine in a tiny, highly restricted box labeled pure. Only clean things, only sanitized places, only certain people. If a tantric teacher wants to shatter that mental conditioning, nodding along in a clean temple does absolutely nothing to rewire the student's nervous system.
Ah, so it was a deliberate shock to the system. You have to force the brain to short-circuit its disgust response.
Exactly. If you want to prove to a conditioned mind that the infinite is truly infinite, you take them to the place society has designated as the absolute bottom of the hierarchy. You take them to the cremation grounds.
Yeah.
You have them sit with the ash, the decay, the outcasts. You force them to find the face of the divine feminine in the terrifying, blood-drinking forms of goddesses, rather than just the docile maternal ones.
Like exposure therapy for the soul.
That is exactly what it is.
The text mentions they would consume things considered deeply polluting, meat, wine, or engaging in forbidden sexual rituals, and not for a party, but to prove that the observing awareness, the Shiva within them, could remain perfectly detached and pristine regardless of what the body was experiencing.
And that level of psychological subversion made Tantra an existential threat to the social order. I mean, think about it. If a peasant realizes the divine is in the dirt just as much as it is in the gold idol, the temple loses its monopoly on salvation.
The power dynamic completely crumbles.
Exactly. Consequently, Tantra was historically misunderstood, demonized as dark magic, and heavily suppressed. It survived only through strict secrecy and parampara, which is an unbroken lineage of private teacher-to-student transmission.
Knowing that this was an underground movement trying to radically rewire the human nervous system, we have to look at the actual tools they used. Because they weren't just sitting around thinking different thoughts, they were physically altering their states of consciousness. Let's dig into the Tantric toolkit, this map of the body and mind.
This is where we transition from philosophy into applied technology. And the practices are visceral. They include mantra, which is the precise use of sacred sound and vibration, yantra, the use of sacred geometry, puja, which is deeply immersive ritual,
Right.
pranayama, the manipulation of breath and autonomic nervous system responses, and highly demanding multi-layered visualizations.
And crucially, the body is at the absolute center of this. Unlike traditions that view the flesh as a heavy coat you want to take off, Tantra maps the body as a microcosm of the entire universe. Your notes bring up the concepts of chakras, energy centers, and natchas, which are subtle energy channels.
Right, the subtle body map.
So I've been trying to map this onto how a modern, analytically minded subpersonality might understand it. In the West, we hear chakra, and people immediately want to find it on an MRI scan as if it's a glowing biological organ hiding behind the stomach.
Which is incredibly frustrating to watch, yeah.
But the notes reframe this beautifully. Are the chakras essentially a user interface for the psyche, like the trash can icon on a computer desktop? There isn't a literal tiny metal bin inside the microchip.
Right, right.
The icon is just a visual interface that allows a human to interact with abstract binary code to produce a consistent result.
That analogy gets you halfway there, and it's a brilliant starting point for a modern mind. Chakras do function as an experiential map. They are a user interface to access incredibly abstract psychological and somatic states.
Okay.
When a practitioner focuses on the heart space, visualizing a specific color, holding a specific breathing pattern, and chanting a specific syllable, they are entering a command code into their nervous system to access a state of deep compassion and expansiveness.
But you said the computer analogy only gets me halfway. Where does it break down?
It breaks down because, in the computer analogy, you are sitting outside the machine operating it. In Tantra, you are the user, you are the interface, and you are the binary code.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is an entirely closed loop of awareness knowing itself.
That distinction changes everything. It means the magic isn't in the external ritual at all. Two people can perform the exact same external puja. They can chant the same Sanskrit words, offer the same flowers, breathe at the same tempo. But one person's just a robot running a program, thinking about what they want for lunch. Their perception hasn't shifted an inch.
While the other person has entirely overridden their default mode network, they are experiencing reality as a vibrantly alive, interconnected web of energy. The ritual is just the scaffolding to hold the mind steady while the perception shifts.
But working with a user interface, that powerful one that deliberately messes with your baseline perception of reality, requires tech support. Which brings us to the most controversial part of this tradition in the modern era, and that's the role of the guru.
Yeah. In the West, our cultural immune system immediately attacks the word guru. We associate it with a loss of autonomy, with cults, with handing our critical thinking over to a charismatic narcissist.
Which is fair.
And frankly, history is full of examples that justify that fear.
But Tira's notes approach the guru relationship not as a surrender of agency, but as a necessary safety mechanism. If you are deliberately dismantling your ego's defenses and unleashing repressed psychological energy, you can't be your own surgeon. You have blind spots.
Exactly. A surgeon cannot operate on their own brain. The genuine tantric guru acts as a mirror that cannot be manipulated by your ego. When the practices dredge up intense fear, or when you experience a massive energetic release and your ego tries to claim it as a superpower, the guru is there to anchor you. They pace your development.
Which perfectly explains the necessity of secrecy in these traditions. It's not elitism. It's not a club where they are just hoarding the good stuff. The notes reframe secrecy as a form of pacing.
Imagine giving the keys to a high-performance sports car to a toddler.
A disaster waiting to happen.
Right. The toddler isn't bad, but they lack the developmental capacity to handle the machine safely. If you hand an advanced taboo-breaking practice to someone whose ego is still deeply insecure, they won't use it to find absolute liberation. They will use it to justify their worst behavior.
Okay.
They will say, oh, I am an advanced tantric, therefore I am beyond conventional morality, so I can mistreat people. Secrecy ensures the practitioner has built the internal container necessary to hold the fire without burning the house down.
And that fire burns the absolute hottest when we enter the territory of our darkest, most exiled emotions. This is where Tantra's relevance to modern psychology, and specifically to your framework of subpersonalities, becomes crystal clear. Let's look at the alchemy of emotion and the illusion of power.
To understand this alchemy, we really have to grasp how Tantra diagnoses the human condition. Unlike paradigms that say humans are born inherently sinful or broken, Tantra asserts that our core problem is simply ignorance, avidya.
But not ignorance like failing a math test. Ignorance as mistaken identity.
Exactly the kind of mistaken identity that happens in a theater. We forget we are the vast silent space of the theater, and we become entirely convinced that we are just one tiny stressed out actor on the stage. We think we are just our job title, our trauma history, or a single subpersonality.
So let's bring this into a real-world Tuesday afternoon scenario. You're at work, and someone criticizes you unfairly. Instantly, an exiled subpersonality, maybe an anxious protector or a defensive child, jumps up and takes over the microphone. The heart races, the chest tightens. A traditional spiritual path might say, suppress that anger. Anger is an obstacle to enlightenment. Take a deep breath and push it away.
Which, psychologically speaking, just pushes the energy of that anger into the shadow, where it festers and controls you covertly. Tantra takes the exact opposite approach. It turns toward the exiled part. It says, do not suppress the anger, but do not act it out blindly either.
So what does Tira do with that terrified, angry subpersonality?
You extract the energy from the narrative. The story your brain is telling you, like, my boss is a jerk, I am underappreciated, that is just the wrapper. Tantra asks you to drop the wrapper and go straight into the physical sensation of the emotion.
Just feeling it purely.
Exactly. Feel the raw heat in the chest. Feel the vibration of the adrenaline. That heat is Shakti. It is raw, divine energy. By focusing pure awareness on the physical sensation without the story, the emotion is sublimated.
The notes have a stunning breakdown of this sublimation process. It says that when viewed through this lens, desire becomes profound focus. Fear, when you step directly into it without a story, becomes a razor-sharp state of hyper-awareness. Grief, rather than being a pit you fall into, becomes incredible emotional depth and capacity for empathy.
It's amazing, right? You are harvesting the energy of your own shadow. You aren't destroying your subpersonalities, you are upgrading them.
But I want to push back here for a second, because this sounds like a recipe for a massive psychological trap.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I am a practitioner actively seeking out intense emotions, intentionally engaging with taboos, and learning to harvest fear and desire into power, doesn't that run the massive risk of just creating a supersized, spiritually inflated ego? Like a sort of spiritual narcissism where I start thinking I'm a god among mortals?
I am so glad you spotted that, because that is the single most dangerous trap on the path, and it is precisely why genuine Tantra is deeply suspicious of the pursuit of power. The ego is the ultimate shapeshifter. When you take away its material toys like money, status, lookstone, it will happily trade them in for spiritual toys.
Oh, look how calm I am. Look at how beautifully I handled that anger. Did you see my aura today?
Exactly. Or look at the visions I had during my visualization practice. I must be very special. The moment the ego claims the experience, the process of liberation stops dead.
So how do they counter that? How do you have these profound, mind-altering experiences and not build a monument to yourself?
Through the grueling discipline of non-attachment to experience, it is one thing to detach from material objects. It is vastly harder to experience a profound state of cosmic unity, an overwhelming surge of bliss, and then, the moment it fades, explicitly instruct yourself, do not cling to that.
Just let it go.
Do not make it your identity. Return to washing the dishes. You must treat the profound spiritual vision with the exact same detached awareness as you treat the feeling of an itchy nose.
Because if you build a monument to the vision, you're just building a new, shinier cage for yourself. You're shrinking the infinite back down into a story about you.
Exactly.
Because Tantra asks practitioners to walk this razor's edge, embracing the taboo, working intimately with raw emotion, constantly watching out for the shape-shifting ego. It attracts a very specific type of seeker. Let's look at how Tantra stacks up against the rest of the spiritual landscape and why a subpersonality like Tira might find it to be the only path that makes sense.
Your source notes use a beautiful metaphor for this. It describes Hinduism not as a single monolith, but as a vast constellation of thought. Tantra is one star in that constellation, but it emits a very different spectrum of light compared to its neighbors.
Let's map this constellation. The notes first compare Tantra to Vedanta, specifically the non-dual school of Advaita Vedanta. Now, both agree that there is only one ultimate reality, but they diverge completely on how to handle the physical world.
Right. Vedanta often frames the world as Maya, which translates to illusion. Imagine sitting in a movie theater. Vedanta tells you that the movie on the screen is an illusion. It's just light playing tricks on your eyes. To find the truth, you must turn away from the screen, realize you're sitting in a dark room, and ultimately seek the projector itself.
But Tantra says, no, the movie isn't a distraction. The movie is the projector expressing itself.
Yes. Tantra says you don't turn away from the screen. You walk straight up to it. You look so closely at the pixels, you immerse yourself so completely in the color and the sound that the illusion dissolves from within the experience. The world is an expression of the divine, not a mistake to be corrected.
Then the notes contrasted with Bhakti, the path of deep devotion. Bhakti is all about the relationship, like the lover surrendering entirely to the beloved divine.
And Tantra incorporates that fierce emotional devotion. A tantrika can be brought to tears by the beauty of the goddess, but it pushes one step further into the concept of ultimate identity.
How so?
Well, in Bhakti, the joy is in the separation. You get to experience the longing for God. In Tantra, the ultimate realization is that the lover, the beloved, and the act of loving are all the exact same substance.
Wow. And what about when compared to classical yoga, like Patanjali's Yoga Sutras?
Classical yoga is fundamentally about stilling the fluctuations of the mind. It treats the mind and body like a muddy pond, and you have to sit perfectly still so the dirt settles to the bottom and the water becomes clear.
Makes sense.
But Tantra says the mud is also water.
Mm.
The ripples are also water. It doesn't just want to still the pond, it wants to dance in the rainstorm, knowing that every drop is pure.
When I look at all these comparisons, it paints a very clear picture of who this path is for. It seems uniquely positioned for the outsider. If you're someone who feels suffocated by rigid moral binaries, or if you, like the listener who wrote these notes, have strong, sometimes contradictory subpersonalities that traditional therapy or orthodox religion tell you to suppress, Tantra basically looks at your messy, complicated psyche and says, bring it on. That is the raw material. We need all of it.
It appeals to the tyras of the world, people who possess a deep intellectual curiosity, but also a visceral need for direct experience. They don't want to be told what the divine tastes like. They want to put it in their mouths. They are drawn to shadow work, to the psychological depths.
But the notes also highlight a fascinating paradox here. Because Tantra is so all-encompassing, because it leaves absolutely nothing out of the equation, a practitioner can easily fall into the trap of thinking it is the best or most complete path.
Which is a huge sign of spiritual immaturity. A novice will always think their map is the only real territory. But a mature practitioner realizes that the diversity of human neurobiology requires a diversity of spiritual doors.
Different strokes for different folks.
Truly, for a person with a highly chaotic, traumatized nervous system, the intense, energetic practices of Tantra might actually be destabilizing. For that person, the quiet, subtractive peace of Vedanta or a silent Vipassana retreat is exactly the medicine they need.
Right. Tantra is heavy machinery. You don't use a bulldozer to plant a tulip.
That is a perfect way to phrase it, and acknowledging that requires humility. It also means that walking the tantric path can be profoundly lonely.
The notes emphasize that loneliness heavily. You are operating in this liminal space. You don't fit in with the conservative rule-following religious crowd because you don't believe the graveyard is impure. But you also don't fit in with the secular, materialistic crowd because you are engaged in an invisible, rigorous internal discipline that they view as magical thinking.
You are holding the tension of opposites entirely within yourself.
Which brings us back, finally and intimately, to you, the listener. Let's look at the ultimate goal of all this heavy lifting. Let's talk about softening the I, the fate of our subpersonalities, and what liberation actually looks like.
This is where the ancient technology meets your deeply personal psychological framework. In Tantra, the ultimate state of liberation is called Jivan Mukti, which means liberation while living.
Not escaping the cycle of reincarnation, not dying and going to a pristine heaven. Liberation right here on a Tuesday in the grocery store.
Exactly. The deepest shift isn't that you stop having thoughts or that your personality gets erased. It is that the sense of I, the egoic identity, loses its rigidity. It softens.
The text has a great way of describing this. It says, it's like suddenly realizing you were playing a video game, rather than feeling the desperate need to exit the game. You keep playing. You still navigate relationships, you still feel sorrow, you still laugh, but you maintain an unbroken awareness of the underlying code beneath the graphics.
Let's apply this to the theater of the mind and the subpersonalities you detailed. You have Tira, the mystic. You probably have other actors on that stage, right? The professional who pays the bills, the inner child who holds old hurts, the fiercely protective critic.
Usually our consciousness is completely hijacked by whichever actor is currently holding the microphone. When the critic is speaking, we literally become the critic. The entire universe shrinks down to the size of that one subpersonality's anxieties.
So what does Tantra do? It doesn't ask you to fire the inner critic. It doesn't ask you to permanently fuse with Tira either. Tira is just another actor, albeit a very wise one. Tantra asks, what is the awareness that is listening to the actors? What is the quiet, luminous space of the theater itself?
Oh, I see. You realize that all your subpersonalities, all your changing moods and masks are Shakti. They are the dynamic, beautiful, terrifying dance of energy. But the space in which they dance, the silent witnessing consciousness that is watching Tira read these notes right now, that is Shiva.
Yes. When you truly realize that you are the theater, the boundaries between the actors begin to soften. The inner critic can still yell, but it doesn't hijack your nervous system anymore because you know you are the space containing the yell. You don't have to destroy your ego. You just stop taking it so seriously.
It's a continuous, daily, moment-by-moment integration. Catching yourself shrinking down to the size of a single emotion, taking a breath, and expanding back out to the size of the room.
That is the practice.
So, what have we actually uncovered in this deep dive? Tira's notes have dismantled the Western illusion of Tantra. It isn't a license for indulgence. It is a precise, grueling, and staggeringly beautiful technology for navigating the human experience.
It refuses to reject any part of you. It takes everything you've been told is broken, messy, or taboo, and it refines it into the very fuel required for your own awakening. It is the ultimate alchemy of the soul.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over, building on the incredible material you brought to us today. We started by contrasting this path with the ascetic on the mountain, trying to escape the noise and the suffering of the world. But if Tantra teaches that our suffering and our darkness are not things to be avoided, but rather raw materials to be intimately studied, think about how that shifts your next difficult moment.
Yeah, that's a huge shift.
Imagine what might happen the next time an exiled subpersonality takes over. The next time you feel a sudden, overwhelming surge of anxiety or a flash of hot, unreasonable anger. What if, instead of instantly trying to fix it or suppress it or shame yourself for feeling it, you just stopped and sat with it?
Just observe it.
Exactly. What if you studied it like a scientist looking at a fascinating new element under a microscope? What is its exact physical temperature? Where does it vibrate in your chest? If you strip away the story you are telling yourself, what secret divine energy might that so-called negative emotion be waiting to hand over to you? If you just had the courage to look at it without flinching.
That is the threshold. That is where the path actually begins.
Thank you so much for bringing such a profound, challenging, and intricately structured set of notes to the table. It has been an absolute privilege to map this territory with you. Keep observing the actors on your stage, keep trusting that the messy parts hold the key, and keep decoding those secret patterns alongside Tira.